Hello, everyone. This is Mark from ACRL and Choice. We are just a couple of minutes before our scheduled start time today. And before we get started at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, I'm here with each of our speakers, and we would like to do a really quick sound check with you folks out there. So if you are able to hear us and we're broadcasting clearly, or if not, if otherwise, please drop a line into that Q&A section to let us know that you can hear us and that we're broadcasting clearly. And great, we're getting a couple indicators in there. Thank you. So before we get started, we'll do a quick hello and maybe just where you're calling from each of the speakers today. Christy, if you'd like to say a quick hello.
Hello, everyone. This is Christy Gertzen from Springer Nature, and I'm dialing in from Utah.
Great, great. And Jeff, if you'd like to do a quick hello.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jeff Southwood. I'm also from Springer Nature, and I'm calling in from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Great. And Heidi, if you'd like to say a quick hello.
Hi, this is Heidi Becker from Dimensions, also calling in from Philadelphia.
Excellent. All right, and it looks like we're getting lots of indicators coming in through that Q&A module that things are working. That's good to hear. Looking at the clock, we are just under 2 minutes before the 11 a.m. start time. So as you're logging in there, please hang out just for a couple of more minutes and we will get started right at 11 a.m. Eastern. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I would like to welcome you to today's program, which is Sick of COVID-19? Listen in for the source on latest research, drug development, and treatments, which is sponsored by Springer Nature. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started today, I would like to point out just a couple of features of the webinar software. First off, all of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off. So don't worry about, generating noise or feedback or anything like that. We've got that taken care of. You don't need to, that doesn't need to be of concern to you. Also, in the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with today's presentation materials, and we are using the Q&A feature, so please use that space to put in questions for each of the speakers today. We'll take some time at the end to answer as many questions as we have time for. We apologize in advance if we don't have time to get to your question. As I said, our time is limited, and we'll do our best. In that Q&A box, you can use the little thumbs up icon to vote up questions that you think are of interest. So please feel free to use that feature. And you can take a look at other people's questions, and if they've got the same questions, feel free to use that upvote or to pose maybe other questions that you have in the Q&A there. Also note that we are recording today's program and that everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. And with that, we are ready to get started. So I will turn things over to Christy for a quick intro.
Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome to everyone that's dialing in. I hope that everyone is doing well, your family and friends, with the impacts of COVID-19. And on the topic specifically, as the scientific and medical research communities continue to search for effective treatments and work on vaccine options worldwide, we're finding at this point in time that there's actually an oversaturation of information. So we're hoping that today's 1 hour webinar session will help to uncover seamless ways to find out treatments and what phases they're in, and identify ways that we can support researchers in accessing the latest COVID-19 research, therapeutics, and drug developments. This, as Mark mentioned, this webinar is sponsored by Springer Nature. We're an international publisher. In addition to our books and our journals products, we have a number of tools and resources to help support the research community. And specifically, today we'll hear from Heidi Becker, who is the Senior Product Specialist and Engagement Manager at Dimensions. The Dimensions product is now available through a partnership with Springer Nature. And joining Heidi today is Jeff Southwood. He's the Director of our Product Management ATIS Insights at Springer Nature. Jeff is responsible for guiding the product strategy for ATIS Insight and ensuring that the product itself helps our researchers find the tools and resources and solutions that they're looking for. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Heidi. And I just want to remind anyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and we will have a Q&A at the end of both presentations. Thank you.
I think we're going to go with Jeff, correct?
Oh, I'm sorry. I keep switching you. Sorry, we're going to lead off with Jeff on ATIS Insight, and then Heidi's going to take it from there. So thanks, Jeff.
Great. Thanks, Christy. Okay. So hopefully you can all see my screen. So as Christy said, we're going to be talking a little bit about COVID-19 and how you keep up with the latest drug research, developments and treatments and vaccines. So got a lot to cover, so I'll get started quickly here. The word unprecedented gets used a lot around COVID-19, and with good reason. A lot of stuff that's going around is unprecedented, but one of the places where it really makes a lot of sense is when you talk about the amount of information that's being produced around COVID-19. I did a quick search on Google. It came back with 5.8 billion results in Google. I did a quick search on PubMed, came back with 53,000 articles published on COVID-19. I did a quick search on clinicaltrials.gov, see what kind of clinical research was going on. There's 6,000 clinical trials going on for COVID-19. So that's a lot of information to keep up with. And ATIS Insight is a tool that helps researchers kind of keep up with the latest information that's being published in that domain. And we really do that by taking some of that burden off of the user. So right, we have a staff of medical editors that go through all the incoming content analyze that, assess it, and then write summaries of the research so that you can read the summarized version and you don't have to read through all 53,000 articles on PubMed. So today we're going to take a look at kind of how Innocence can do that, and some of the examples of how we can pull out insights quickly for researchers. So we're going to focus on kind of the big questions. The first one really is, what is the status of pharmaceutical research for COVID-19? So you can do a quick search. All I did is on our Google-like bar, I picked indication as what I want to search on. I picked COVID-19. All of our search is done off of our controlled vocabulary list. So that's one of the jobs our expert editors do, is they go through all of our records and make sure we call everything the same thing. For COVID-19, that's probably not as problematic, but you can see we have some synonyms: COVID-19, COVID-19 infections. It kind of gets more complicated in things like oncology, where you could call it oncology or you can call it cancer. It's good to have a defined kind of vocabulary so that the searching is very precise, and then we can handle those kind of other terms as synonyms. So I did a quick search. COVID-19 came up with 562 drugs, 1,062 trials, things like that. Going on with that. And then I just started to use our analysis tool to see kind of how that, what kind of trends we can see. So first I look at organizations to see kind of what organizations are looking at doing COVID-19 research. And not a surprise that the USA National Institutes of Health is the biggest research partner in this effort on drug development. But then you can also see there's some corporate entities. AstraZeneca is kind of leading the way on the corporate side with Roche, Glaxo, and Merck. You can also see that there's some academic institutions that are out there that are working on this. You can see that there's University of California. You can see Harvard's up there. So yeah, you can see there's lots of people, and it's really easy to kind of focus in on exactly what they're doing. Thought it also might be interesting to look at see how that research is progressing. So again, really easy to do. Just go through and use the analysis tool to search by, to analyze by phase. And we can see that the majority of research right now is really clustered here in the preclinical research area. But some compounds have broken through and reached clinical development. You can see right here, most of those are clustered there in phase 2 and moving on. We do have some that have moved on, 30 so have moved on to phase 3. But then we do have a handful that have really progressed fast, and they are 2 of them are marketed, 2 of those compounds are registered status, and 1 is in registration status. So you can really kind of easily tell how which drugs are progressing through, and you can click through to see exactly which one of those drugs is kind of winning the race or leading the way. It's also interesting when talking about how people are progressing through and where where progress is being made, to kind of look at it regionally. So here I took a quick look at that by country. And these are the top countries that are researching COVID-19. It's again not a surprise. The United States is leading the way here. You can see that the stacked bar here shows kind of where the different programs are in the life cycle of development. But then you can see the UK and China and Canada are kind of close behind us. And then you can kind of see how the curve kind of flattens out there as we kind of get towards the tail. So that kind of gives you a sense of kind of what the status of the research is. We've got a lot of compounds that are being developed, a lot of compounds that are in that preclinical research phase, but then a lot are kind of making much more decisive progress, moving into clinical development and then getting into the market. What are some of the other research trends? What are researchers looking at? How are they looking at treatments for COVID-19? And here I think it's important to take a look at 2 different types of kind of research. Those research programs are looking into vaccines, and those research programs are looking into drug treatments. And so it's easy enough to do with ADIS Insight. Once again, we're can filter on that. So I've done that. I've taken my broad COVID-19 search and filtered by vaccines and then by not vaccines to kind of come up with this list. And this is looking at drug class. So what are the most popular drug classes that people are looking at? So it's kind of obvious that for vaccines, the #1 drug class is vaccines. Within that, a subset would be viral vaccines. That being a child term of vaccine. So one of the things about our ontology is that it is hierarchical. So we do have parent terms, and then each parent term would then subsequently have child terms, which helps us again with that granularity and searching capabilities. But then you can look kind of down the list. You can see recombinant proteins is a popular vaccine drug class, and you can kind of get down to the tail there, and you can see that gene therapies. There's 2 people working on gene therapies as a vaccine for COVID-19. Similarly, over here on the drug side, anti-infectives are the #1 drug class for drugs. Antivirals being the biggest child term of that class. You can also see that small molecules, there's lots of those being developed. People looking at blood proteins. Looking down further, you can see there's some cell therapies, some monoclonal antibodies. So you can really get a sense here of kind of where the research is focused, primarily at the top, but you can see that there's some outlier research that's going on at the bottom that might end up being something new and novel. Similarly, which mechanisms are being looked at is an interesting thing to study, I think, for COVID-19. So our mechanisms are target-based. So the target that the drug is, the biological target that the drug is either modulating, inhibiting, or stimulating is the first half of our target, and then the second half of our target is the action that's taking on it. So immunomodulators is the biggest MOA for vaccines, but you can also see there's some other activity going on further down for the drug research. Also, immunomodulators is the #1 thing that people are looking at. But then you can see that there's a lot of work being done on virus replication, both as a modulator, but mostly as an inhibitor. You can look at some people looking at cell replacements. There's about 20 programs that are looking at those. And you can see down the list that it does get to be, there's a fair number of people looking at a lot of very different kinds of mechanisms and a lot of different targets for treating COVID-19, both as a vaccine and as well as a drug therapy. And another one we talk a lot about with our researchers and our users is about biomarkers. That's a really interesting new area. It's getting a lot of attention recently. And so I thought it'd be interesting to see kind of what biomarkers are being looked at for COVID-19 and as terms of drug research. So we've got CRP is by far the most common biomarker. But then you can see the TNF alpha is up there, CD4, some common biomarkers that people are looking at. And these biomarkers could be used for many different ways. And we detail that within our database. It could be used as inclusion-exclusion criteria for patient selection. That could be being used for outcome measurements. It could be used for adverse event monitoring or safety monitoring. So a lot of different ways to be using biomarkers, but these are the biomarkers that are at the top of the list that people are looking at when they're doing their research for drug treatments. So that gets through the first 2 questions. The next thing researchers are often interested in are what really are the pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic characteristics of drugs that are being developed. And in this case, I framed it around novel treatments for COVID-19. So if you happen to be a researcher and you were looking at cytofilin inhibitors as your mechanism of action, you might be interested to know that you can search for that on ADAS Insight, once again using our Google bar and selecting mechanism. And then you could filter here on the left for COVID-19 infections, and you come up with one drug that's actually being studied for that mechanism, and it's CRV 431. You can see a little bit about it here, but if you click through, you can read more about it. So we have here an at-a-glance section, which gives you a really high overview of what this drug's all about. Talks about the originators and the developers, what class it's in, what the mechanisms are. if it has any special status, if it's available for licensing. It also talks about what the highest development phase is. So you can see here that it's being studied for lots of different reasons, but it is in preclinical phase for COVID-19. And you can also see then what the most recent activity was on this drug. So September 17th, we entered in the pharmacodynamic data from preclinical trials for COVID-19 infections was released and entered into our database. So that gives you a nice overview of the last three things that we've updated it. And then you can look over the table of contents. This is the entire document. You can jump directly to whichever section is most interesting to you. So here we're looking at pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. So you can jump straight to the scientific summary section. And you can see here's a really quick synopsis that's been written by, as I said, our team of expert editors who go through all the sources and summarize them here so that you can get a quick overview of what's being said. So here we have the pharmacokinetic stuff that's being reported in the preclinical research and in animal models in terms of this drug. Next section here talks about adverse events, which are being reported for CRV 431, and then a longer section on the pharmacodynamics, summarizing what has been found in the various studies that have been conducted, all summarized here. But then if you wanted to know more, each of these sections is cited. So we have our citation from where we got this information, and you can click on that citation tool or that citation number, and that will bring up a little box that gives you the actual citation, and then a link that goes directly to our source material. So we can take you all the way up to the paywall, but we can't get you in. So we'll point you to the direction of that article, but then it'll be up to your own entitlements as to whether you could actually view it or not. So you might have to pay per view it if your academic institution or organization doesn't have a subscription to this particular journal. But you can, that option is there, and people take advantage of that a lot, drilling down into seeing more detail. So then the next thing I thought might be interesting to know is, so what are the trial results that are being reported from leading treatments in COVID-19? So I think we've all heard about Remdesivir. It's in the news a lot, people talking about it as a good option for treatment. So I can easily search for that on ADIS Insight. Once again, using my Google-like bar, but this time I'm picking drug name, that's how I'm going to search. And I come up with a list of profiles, profiles and trials and safety reports that are all associated with that particular drug. I'm right now looking at the trials tab because I just want to look at trials, and I'm only interested in those that have results. So I've filtered this by trials with results, and that gets me 6 trials. And you can see here, 4 of them are completed. 1 is active and not recruiting any longer, and 1 is still in the recruiting stage. Look at the number of patients that are enrolled in those studies, the indications that's being studied, and the design of that study right here, kind of at the search site. But then you can click through, and you get more information about the trial. And once again, this is all summary information that we've written about this particular trial. We talk here about the outcomes and the endpoints. So this particular trial, we've assessed this as a positive outcome trial because the primary endpoints have been met. Talk then down here about what those primary endpoints are. So they're looking at the odds ratio for improvement on a 7-point ordinal scale as compared to the current standard of care. And the 5-day randomized version of that was reported as met on August 12th, 2020. But then they also on that same day reported that they didn't meet the odds ratio improvement on the 7-day ordinal scale as a 10-day randomized measure. So a little kind of some positive and some maybe mixed message there, but certainly that the improvement over the 5-day randomized scale was positive. And they talk a little bit more about what the endpoints were. Down here, if you click this, you could see more endpoints, what they were looking at besides the primary endpoints, what the other endpoints they were looking at. Talk a little bit up here about the overview of the trial. So what were the patients that were being enrolled? How many were enrolled? Both how much did they plan to enroll? How many did they get? Some of the characteristics of those patients. the inclusion and exclusion criteria that they were focused on. We also talk about the detail of the trial. So who's the sponsor? Who else was affiliated with this? When did it start? When did it end? Things like that. We talk about the trial arms, what were the treatment arms for this particular study. But then the interesting thing that we kind of also add on top of all this kind of trial detail information is summary of the results, both from an efficacy point of view and a safety point of view. So once again, we've read through the journal articles and the conferences, abstracts that have been published out of this particular study and summarize those results here in this section. And then as before, here are our citations with links to the actual articles that you could follow yourself. And once again, we'll get you the paywall, but then it's up to you to get through yourself. We also highlight who the investigators are and what the trial centers are for a particular study. So it's a really good way to get a good overview of a particular clinical trial by reading through this kind of summarized version of what's going on. You might also be interested in seeing kind of across all of the Remdesivir clinical trials that are reporting results, what are those results? And to do that, the best way in ADIS Insight is to use a plugin called Bizint, which is developed by a partner of ours, comes standard with a subscription to the database, but allows you then to take out the information from ADIS Insight and display it in kind of this cellular fashion, where you've got each clinical trial in a row, and then various different characteristics that you want to look at in each of the columns. So you can look across to see kind of overall what phase are these studies in, what overall the results were, and then what results are being reported in terms of efficacy, tolerability. So that's a good way to kind of look at a broad section of trial results there. And then finally, I'm going to end up here on kind of looking at the safety side of things. Kind of what are some of the adverse events that have been associated with treatments of COVID-19? And so I think, once again, there's been a lot of talk certainly early on in the COVID-19 struggle about hydroxychloroquine. And so I was looking at what are some of the safety side effects of maybe off-label use of that? Because we did hear about that early on, was it might have been helpful, be efficacious in terms of a COVID-19 treatment, but there were a lot of questions about what the safety profile looked like, and that the risk-benefit ratio was really in the patient's favor. And so I did a quick drug name search again, and this time I'm looking over at the safety records, and I can see that there were 576. I filtered first on just looking at serious ones, and I filtered on ADR case reports, because that's how we differentiate between adverse events, news, and then special situations. So just looking at adverse events that are serious, we had 576 of those in our database. So I took a look. I quickly used the analysis tool to kind of just graph that, and you can see that there are some serious ones in there, right? I mean, there are serious adverse events, but there were primarily the highest ranging ones were eye disorders. After that, cardiovascular disorders, affections, immunological disorders, things like that. And you can drill down and get more specific into these details, but this is a fairly high level rolled up view of kind of what the serious adverse events are. And then if you wanted to, you could drill into an actual record and see kind of what the actual adverse event was that was being reported. So this one here was about a 70-year-old woman who was treated with hydroxychloroquine and was given, I guess she developed cardiovascular disorders. The treatment was stopped, and then she showed modest recovery in LVEF over time. So kind of just a real quick summary of what one patient's experience was with this particular drug. And that's a level of granularity you can drill down into if you're interested in that level of detail as a researcher. So yeah, so that's kind of hopefully a really quick overview on kind of the state of COVID-19 drug development research, both in terms of vaccines and drugs, how you can use a tool like ADIS Insights to really get up to speed on all that research that's being published, and use our tools then to help kind of draw out insights and get real fine assessments of what the state of development is. So that's me. So at this point, I will pass it over to Heidi, and she'll talk to you about dementia.
Great, thank you, Jeff. That was fascinating. I'm just sure. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Just checking. Anyone? Okay.
It looks good, Heidi. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. My name is Heidi Becker. I'm a senior product specialist and engagement manager for Dimensions. And I thought today we would take kind of a much wider lens and look via Dimensions data at what's happening around the world in multiple different places in the research life cycle. So I'm going, so I've titled this, Is There Good News? Yes, there is good news. And I'd like to focus on that today. I think we could all use a break from the unrelenting bad news. First of all, I'm going to just briefly introduce you to Dimensions, what it is, and I can't possibly cover all the things you can do with it, but just the basics. And then we'll talk about funding for COVID research, the impact of preprints and open access publications, as well as data sets, clinical trials. I'm not going to get into anywhere near as much detail as Jeff. And then we're going to also talk about what policymakers are doing. So this is a bit about Dimensions. We really wanted to move beyond looking at just publications and citations as the end all and be all of research. There's so much else that goes into the research life cycle. From the moment a grant is awarded, you get insights into research that has yet to begin. We have some grants and Dimensions that are active as far as 2049. So you can look at 5-10 years worth of awarded grants that haven't even begun yet. Obviously, then research is conducted, preprints, data sets are generated prior generally to the point of publication in a peer-reviewed journal. And then even at the time of publication, you have attention online. So you have news outlets picking it up. You have bloggers talking about it. There's activity on social media. Then, the typical order, citations begin to accrue, not to diminish their importance, but beyond that, is this research being referenced in a clinical trial? Is it being referenced in a patent application? Are policymakers talking about it? So this much broader research landscape is what we are trying to capture with Dimensions. This is just a brief view of the platform. You can see the content types that we include. So we have publications, again, data sets, awarded grants, patents, clinical trials, and policy documents. It's a very nice platform. Happy to show you more if you're interested at some point, but this is the basis. This is the data on which I'm going to present the next few sections. So this is a graph of kind of understanding the coronavirus outbreak using Dimensions. We use multiple terminology changes over time. At the beginning of this, earlier in the year, we weren't even talking about it as COVID-19. So being able to capture different terminology over time has been really important, and it's very easy to do in Dimensions. We have full text indexing for about 70% of our publications, so you can look through, search for very specific terms in the full text. We took advantage of that, obviously, when we produced this graph, but it gives you a sense of the different content types since January of this year and how quickly they've been coming into Dimensions. Funding, the good news here is, as of yesterday, the day before, little time is blurring. We have over 3,000 COVID-related awards with a start date of this year or next year that total 1.8 billion. US dollars. So that is good news. That is rapid investment. If you look at the chart on the right side of your slide, you'll see the distribution by number of awarded grants by country. So unsurprisingly, as Steph pointed out, United States is at the top, but you can see that this is genuinely becoming a global effort. And you'll also notice this is an analytical view and dimensions of this COVID search, and I'm looking right now at the top funders, and you can see that not only federal funders and the usual suspects, but private foundations are also stepping up. We have over 500 funders in dimensions, both private and federal national funders, and you can see not only a mix of private and public, but also again some geographic variety in where this money is coming from. And you can also see this is a nice little geomap that you can generate in dimensions fairly with one or two clicks. You can see that financial support is increasing geographically. So where it started out in a much more concentrated way, now we see this funding being spread out globally, which needs to happen if we're going to have a global solution to this crisis. The next thing I wanted to talk about is preprints. Preprints have rapidly established themselves as a mainstream research output. We index preprint servers in dimensions, unlike some A&I databases. And this is something I'm very proud of, in addition to the fact that Dimensions offers their publications and data sets free for researcher, non-commercial use. If you go to app.dimensions.ai, you can look for yourself. We want to accelerate the progress of research, and I'm very proud that our company has decided to make that information publicly available. At any rate, from a very small amount of initial preprints posted very early in this crisis in January, we'll see in the next graph that they accounted for around a quarter of research output by the beginning of May. Currently, we have over 28,000 COVID-19 related preprints in Dimensions. So here you can see a chart. This is from a report that I recommend that Digital Science produced, how COVID-19 is changing research culture. You can see here the distribution of the different types of publications that are being pulled into Dimensions, again, related to COVID. And you can see the peak around May, end of April, where preprints really started to come in high volume. And again, the added advantage having preprints accessible is that it accelerates the sharing and dissemination of research. So researchers can build on each other's work. And this is happening like we've never seen before, partly due to technology and partly because of the way research culture is indeed changing. I do want to address kind of the elephant in the room about preprints. There are varying opinions on preprints since they're not peer-reviewed, but there are ways to check on preprints. So I'm showing here a screenshot of Dimensions. I've done an extended search. It doesn't show you everything here, but these are all of the different terms we've seen for COVID-19 since the beginning of the year. I'm looking only at preprints that have been published. Some publishers will have dates in the future, but published at least this year. And what I can do in Dimensions is I can not only look at this article, but I can get some context around it. So I can get the citations. Some of you might be familiar with this particular study. We use altmetric to bring in news mentions, social media mentions, blog entries, Wikipedia entries, you name it. There's about 15 different sources that we pull in. So if I really want to dig down and I say, okay, I'm not going to take this preprint at face value, I really want to see what people are saying about it. So this is something, again, altmetric data tends to come in even before citations. So if I quickly look at the blog posts by clicking on that little badge, I can read the context of these blog posts. I can see how this research is being talked about, and I can do that with, in this case, I've picked blog entries. You could look at news stories. You could look at actual tweets on Twitter. So you don't have to look at this research in the absence of any context or commentary. Related again to preprints is open access. The majority of related publications are open access. The total number of related publications is over 147,000. You'll see a majority of those are open access, and you can see the breakdown by category there. Again, this is critical to helping researchers collaborate quickly on research and work towards solutions we're all hoping to see sooner than later. And if we look even further, this is another screenshot of dimensions. I'm looking at all open access COVID-related publications that were published this year. You can see if we were to exclude preprints, we would be missing a lot of content that's out there. So we have a number of preprints that dominate this list, preprint servers that dominate this list, and that's really important to have access to. The other thing we surface in dimensions are data sets. So there are currently over 2,000 COVID-related data sets and dimensions, providing both the publications and the data sets to researchers at no cost helps, again, accelerate the pace of research, especially with many labs facing challenging circumstances. They're not able to do the work that they plan to do. Having these data sets available for other researchers to build upon is critical to progress. When we looked at that funding map, we could see that there were several gaps. If you look at the geographic diversity of the data sets that are contained in dimensions, it's quite astounding. And again, if we're going to work on a global solution, we need data from around the world. And this was very exciting to me to see how many different countries have data sets posted, have an author with a data set posted in dimensions. So this is very encouraging as far as research goes with related to COVID. And I wanted to look a little bit more into that, and unsurprisingly, the areas that tend to be hardest hit in the beginning are generating more data sets than others. But you can see, again, looking at this geographic distribution, there is data coming in, whether in small pieces or large pieces, from an increasing number of countries around the world. On the right side is the top 20. Unsurprisingly, again, China and the United States are at the top of this list, but you can keep going down, and there's a lot of different variety in the geographic distribution, which I think is critical. Clinical trials in dimensions, we have almost 6,000 clinical trials that began this year. These are the leaders by registry. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on clinical trials since Jeff covered that so comprehensively. But again, if we look at clinical trials around the world, in dimensions, there are over 600 phase 3 clinical trials related to COVID-19 that are being conducted around the world. Another interesting tidbit that you can learn from, tidbit's probably a bad word, from dimensions is looking at intellectual property and emerging intellectual property related to COVID. So as far as patents, applications that were filed this year, there were over 100 related patent applications. These are the top 10 assignees on these related patent applications. It's nice here, again, to see a mix of academia and private companies working towards commercially viable products. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was policy documents. So in Dimensions, one of the beauty of the platform is we connect research with policy documents. So we're not only presenting you with policy documents, we're showing you the research that it cites. So you can actually look again at this progression from funding to research, publication, to clinical trials, intellectual property, if that interests you, as well as how is this research translating into policy documents. There are over 2,600 related policy documents in Dimensions. Some of them vary. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. Some of them are just status updates as far as current number of cases and testing, but there are other guidelines and recommendations. And these are also coming from all over the world. So just to show you a few examples of the types of policy documents that you can find in Dimensions from a number of sources. So the World Health Organization, the CDC, there are regional bodies in there that are providing guidance, and you can really see how all of this research that's been done so quickly is manifesting itself in these policy documents and guidance. And as we know, this is rapidly changing. The more science advances, the more policy documents and guidelines change. So being able to keep track of this entire life cycle of research is helpful not only for the researchers themselves and the people working on solutions, but also for governmental agencies that are seeking to provide the best guidance they can based on the most current information. Which brings me again to my final point. There is good news. Research is being shared more quickly than ever before. Preprints and other open access outputs help accelerate research by removing financial barriers to access. Data sets from an increasingly global set of data allows researchers to identify differences in that data and help complement and advance ongoing analysis and research. Clinical trials are moving ahead quickly and in high volume, and funders are highly prioritizing related grants, which is translating into over $1 billion in resources currently to invest in solutions. So that is the good side of the COVID situation, and I hope that was helpful and informative to you to see get a sense of this much more broad global activity around COVID. And if you want to learn more about Dimensions, you can visit our website at dimensions.ai, or you can follow us on Twitter. And thanks very much. I think we have plenty of time for questions now. I tend to be a fast speaker.
Excellent. Thank you, Heidi. Let's take a look at the Q&A module. If folks have questions, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in there. We have, as Heidi just said, plenty of time for questions. So I would encourage folks to take the opportunity to let us know what you want to hear about. So we've got a couple of questions coming in. It's great. I think for you, Jeff, one of the questions that came in early on in your presentation was from Duddy, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name. And Duddy asks, are all the numbers based on the number of publications there in ADIS Insights?
That's a great question. No, is the answer. So ADIS Insight is not a publication database. It's a drug pipeline database. So what we do is we take all the publications that have been written about a particular drug and summarize them into a single drug profile. So what those numbers are all drug-based. So the graphs that I showed about drug development were all research programs themselves. So there are, I think I remember there were like 563 research programs right now in ADIS Insight for COVID-19. And so each one of those research programs is going to have a lot of publications around it. But the counts and all the graphs were all done based on the number of research programs. Yeah.
Excellent, great. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And we have another question that's come in for ADIS Insights. So we'll stick with you for a second there, Jeff. You mentioned the controlled vocabulary in there. Is there a way to see how those terms are defined, or, you know, is there some sort of glossary or that sort of thing that's available to folks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we make that visible to our users in our advanced search. I just looked at simple search today, the Google bar, because I wanted to keep it kind of a high level, but we do have an advanced search page where each of those terms, like the drug class, mechanism of action, indication, even country and organization, they all have their own controlled vocabulary. And we expose those in advanced search through a hierarchy view. So you can click on indication hierarchy view, and you can see exactly what the parent terms are and what all the child terms that roll up underneath that are. So you can make the best decision on how you want to search what we've indexed for those terms. Yep.
Excellent. My apologies here. My son has walked into the room. So if there's a little background noise, I apologize for that. We have a question here from Andrea, who asks really about the patents. So I think that's for you, Heidi.
Yes.
Are those global patents? Where are all those patents coming from, and how are they?
Yes, so we have a large number of patent registries and dimensions currently. By the end of 2020, we will have all of them. We get our patent information from another digital science company called IFI Claims. If you've ever looked at Google Patents gets their data from IFI Claims. So we all play together well in digital science. I hope that answers your question, Andrea. I'd be happy to talk more if you'd like offline.
Right. And another question that we've got in the pipeline here is from Sarah, and I think this one goes over to you, Jeff. It's a question about the side effects and those sorts of things that you were talking about earlier. And Sarah says those highly specific cases of side effects, are those retrieved from published case studies or from other sorts of places? Where do they come from?
That's a great point. Yes, so that's exactly where they come from. So I guess the kind of the journey would be, a patient goes in to see the doctor. The doctor administers the drug. The drug has some sort of unpredicted side effect or activity, and the doctor would then write a small journal article on it and publish it. And that's where we pick those things up from. So yeah, we monitor the global literature for all these adverse events, and we bring them in, and we have our human experts read through each one of them, summarize it into that really short, condensed, kind of summary, and tag it with all of our controlled vocabulary, so it's easy to find. And then we can do all these things with it for the analysis, and really give you that kind of holistic view of a particular drug. That's exactly where they come from.
Okay, great. And we've got a question here for Heidi that just came in as well. And it's kind of very specific to dimensions and how it works, but how do you find the global map functionality and dimensions? Can you talk about that a bit?
Do you mind if I share my screen again really quick?
Go for it, yeah.
That's the best way to do this. Okay, so this is Dimensions Analytics. So this is the paid subscription version. The free version of Dimensions, you'll only see publications, data sets. There'll be fewer filters and less functionality in the analytical views, which function like a pivot table for your result set. So if whatever you search for, you can get high level. I'm just going to quickly do. I'm going to put quotes around it just because that hyphen. And you can see we have the option to search the full data, not just a title and abstract. So if I were to look now, this Places tab is where you would find that geo map. And you can change this level, so you can look at a country. There's not a lot of variety there, unfortunately, but you can zoom in and then you can export this as an image. Or if you want the data behind the visualization, you can also get that as well.
Unmute there. Great. That's very helpful. Thank you. And looking at the list of questions, that's what we've got for now. I would give folks just another minute or two. If you have additional questions, go ahead and drop them in that Q&A box.
Hey Mark, while we're waiting,
of course,
that last question got me thinking. And so the first question I answered about whether the graphs are about publications or whether they're about drugs. So that my answer was for the drug graphs, but certainly for the adverse event question, that actually is publications. Because that would be the number of those journal articles that have been written by doctors. So there was like 700 and some eye disorders papers that were written by doctors. So I just wanted to clarify that because it did kind of come into my mind as I was answering that last question. Thanks.
Yeah, great. All right.
Yeah, and I'll actually put a link to the free version of Dimensions in the chat, so everyone can take a look.
Okay.
Oops.
I'll copy you and I'll put the version of What Insight in there as well.
Yeah. It's a great opportunity to do that. So.
And it's Christy here. I'm just going to take a peek at our inbox just to see if we have any emails, but I'll let you guys know if there's any additional questions coming from there.
Great. Oh, Andrea says her chat is disabled.
Yep, we should still be able to send out that to all the.
I'll, you know what, Andrea, for you, I'll type the.
And just for all of our attendees today, you can look forward to an email from us with the recorded webinar and the slide decks, and we can also embed those links for everybody as well.
Great. All right, looking at our list of questions. I'm not sure that we have any additional questions that have come in. So, and I think we've given folks plenty of time to type in a quick question if they've got them. So I'll just say, Christy, is there anything else that you want to add here at the end before we sign off?
No, I just want to thank both Heidi and Jeff for their presentations today. As I just mentioned, do keep an eye out for an email in the next couple of days with the recorded webinar and the slide decks. And if you have any questions at that point in time, feel free just to reach out to us and we can field the questions to Heidi and to Jeff, and we can get those answered for you. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you. And from ACRL in Choice, thank you to you, Heidi, and to you, Jeff, and to you, Christy, for putting this together and for the presentations. Lots of interesting stuff there. And I would just say to the folks listening in out there, at the end of the webinar, it should redirect you to a quick survey. If you could take just a minute or two to respond to that, we would really appreciate it. Those surveys help us with the technology and any input that you have. So if you could take a moment, we really would appreciate your feedback. Thanks again to everyone out there listening in, and to Heidi and to Jeff. And we hope to see you in the near future on another webinar.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.